So this is my bag, unfortunately. I never intended when I graduated law school to have anything to do with material support or terrorism cases, but I was thrown into it because even, respectfully, the strongest allies in the legal community were not only not doing justice to these cases, but really, quite frankly, in my opinion, whether by their practice or their political framing, downright betraying their clients, betraying the movement, betraying their own obligations towards their clients. Before I begin my segment, I want to thank everybody here who's come out in the rain from near and far, but especially the folks who have been running around, who have been doing everything so graciously, thrown into fire. Many of the young activists you see here are quite new to the movement and quite young. Lina and Tariq and Yaqeen and Amir. Raja, who spoke today, came to Awda as a youth and is now the executive director of Majlis al-Shura. We are so proud of Raja. I think he's left by now or maybe upstairs. Fatma and Alia and Sara, and I'm going to forget names, Ruqayya, Elma, all of you, thank you so much. Luna, quite a gem. I haven't gotten to know Luna too well. I've learned about her, and I've heard about her from her hosts in Palestine, from where she recently returned, full front lines, and hopefully I can keep a few minutes to Q&A or anything else that you want to add, Luna, if you wanted. So I thank you both, Rico and Luna and Yaqeen. So my job will be to give an overview and some perspective, and then attempt and offer of what we can do to ensure that our resources and our time is not being wasted reacting and responding to what we've been forced to react and respond to for almost 30 years at this point, but really the past 23 years. I start with reminding people that there is little power greater than the power to define.
That's right.
There is almost no power or no act more central to winning a war than the first step and the power of defining the enemy. And the definition to which Palestinians have been subject has shifted and always expanded to include those who share our characteristics by virtue of identity, by virtue of morality, by virtue of ethics, principles, and goals. So at first, it was just the Palestinians who were the threat. Then it was the Arabs who were the threat. And then it was the Muslims who were the threat. And then it was the leftists, and it was the black allies who were surveilled, and it was the schools and the children, right? Without exaggeration. Now, I also want to give perspective that there was a time that that wasn't the case. If we go back to the 1940s, even though at the time the US was agitating for the inclusion of the Zionist entity into the United Nations, it was also at that same time that the US was part and parcel of the building of institutions dedicated to Palestinian return. In fact, the US, along with a few other states, 2 or 3 other states, was a member of the UN Conciliation Commission for Palestine. That commission, incredibly, was tasked with doing primarily 2 things. Number 1, releasing the funds of Palestinians stolen by Zionists to their owners. And number 2, ensuring the repatriation of Palestinian refugees. The US was also party to another thing, which is backdoor negotiations led by the International Committee for the Red Cross to secure the release of Palestinian slaves, labor, and prisoners held in outdoor, open, Zionist-run camps. Up until the 1950s, the US was party to the negotiations for the release of Palestinian hostages. And it wasn't till a few years later that we saw a very rapid turn by US of its policies, disavowing the UNCCP, saying, no, this is just a political issue, refusing to give more than a few sentences. And then in the 1970s, after Operation Boulder, the US Supreme Court, full-fledged, with the Department of State and the executive office behind it, declares by law that Palestinians do not deserve equal protection under the law, that Palestinian dual nationals may be discriminated against for the purposes of affecting foreign policy. And so it is from this context that we then have, right, that we see all of this came in its alignment with Israel and Israeli policy. What is Israel and Israeli policy, right? It's the policies of colonization. It's the policies of mass humiliation, daily humiliation as a form of mass torture. This is how it must be addressed. It is the literal torture of children and the murder and body snatching and abuse and theft and rape of pillaging. So the material support laws must be understood in this context, and we must know that they are enacted specifically to expand the circumference and the reach of Zionist violence against Palestinians and those who align with them. They are a violent attack and assault and insistence that Palestinians do not object or attempt to survive collectively their own murder, that they do not survive their own genocide, that they are, in all means possible, right, an exception to constitutional law, deprived of the right to protect their lives and the lives of their families. The right to enjoy your family includes the right to be able to protect them. We are deprived of that as Palestinians and allies. And I stress this is not a theoretical rhetoric offering that I'm making. This is an offering that is really must be materially, in my opinion, I mean this with all humility, must be the foundation of the narrative that we use when we address it, right? So we understand that the material support laws and all these criminalizations, civil and criminal, are an expansion and adoption of Israeli violence, colonization, and apartheid for genocide. Apartheid is the first part of the sentence. It's apartheid for genocide, right? They are anti-Palestinian and they are violent, right? And they're also intended to create a subclass. Palestinians as a subjugated people. Palestinians as a subclass of people, and therefore Zionists as supremacists. So material support laws are the codification of Zionist violent supremacy. And they must be discussed as this, right? That's their most innocuous conception, is the creation of a subclass and the codification of supremacy. You know, another thing to understand, Miko addressed it, you know, and I'm sure none of us would be here if we didn't believe this. Nothing is immutable. My WhatsApp line is, all that's real turns to dust. But things don't magically turn to dust absent climate catastrophe. It requires our participation, number one. Number two, to understand and remember that it was not until 1994 that the material support laws were enacted. It was not until 1997 that Palestinian groups were being designated. Ya Jama'ah, that's not a long time ago, right? These are still fresh, so when we were post 9/11 navigating them, they were still relatively new. Moving ahead strategically, a few offerings before we make proposals. Please remember that the highest and lowest, the last and the first phase of policy change is the discourse, is the narrative. The goal of policy change is to make a certain perception, a narrative, the dominant one. Which means that at the first stage, we must begin agitating consciously, collectively, for this narrative that we hope makes sense and that you will use. Number two, policy shapes governance and in part law. Law is created by legislators and executive orders. But law is also created, shaped, and changed by social movements and by social and political orders and powers inside and outside the US. And this includes civil society and institutions, public and private. So as much as law shapes society, law is and can and constantly is being shaped by society. And guess what, folks? Society is you. 3. I don't know what number I'm on. 3. See, Luna. Law is not self-executing. There are people in rooms across the US and across the world who decide which laws get executed. Meaning, they decide, people like me and you, no big boogeyman, people like me and you, right, decide who is being prosecuted, which law is being enforced. I'm sorry to use this example. There are sodomy laws on the books across America. Are they being enforced? No, because laws don't enforce themselves. People enforce them, right? 4, no system, no institution is magic, inaccessible, you know, the Wizard of Oz, right? Just a dude behind a curtain, right? Each system, each institution is comprised of parts, and those parts are comprised of people, right? And those parts come in many phases, not just the actual physical institutions they are, but the feeder institutions, whether it's the law schools, or the training schools, or the communities, or the churches, feeder institutions that we need to start learning how to map out in really tangible ways. And people are what? People are movable. People are not immutable, with rare exception. 5? Don't believe in boogeymen. اللي بيخاف من البعبع بيطلع له. If there is something that you are too scared to address, I assure you, your fear will be realized, right? When there is a hot potato, you touch it, you talk about it, you bring it out into the public, you wave it around, hot potato, and it cools off. One of our biggest weaknesses around the material support laws is that we're too afraid to even talk about them, right? And that's understandable, but what we, and hundreds of us, and there are hundreds of us, and we will reconvene and we could talk about what we're doing to this end, but what we, and hundreds of us, who have privilege and access and knowledge, and know how to navigate them, and I promise you it's not so hard, I'm gonna give you a couple of one-liners, know is, there is the right way to address it, and there is sometimes a wrong way to address it, but really addressing it generally in the US, and even in many parts of the UK, and I might get some time to talk about the UK and my experiences and understanding of your system and the civil society and legal society there. But anyway, the most dangerous thing we can do is give material support laws more power over our lives than they have. The intention is not just to intend the subjugation of Palestinians, but to define our relationships with ourselves, with our families, with each other, with our people in Palestine, and with the struggle. That the moment that we internalize this fear without having otherized people, without saying on CNN, no, Hamas, not me, Hamas bad, right? Without even having to say that, the minute that you internalize that fear, you have otherized our families, right? Our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, and eventually you. This otherization, the 6 civil society organizations, it was inevitable that they would be designated by Israel, and they are, I'm sorry to say, very likely perhaps in consideration for designation by the US. This would never have happened, right, if Islamic Jihad and PFLP and Hamas and Qassam and all of them were not designated before. And there's been no real agitation, meaningful, no movement, meaningful to challenge and reject in rhetoric, I'm not saying support, in rhetoric this. So that before they got to designating the 6, before they come for me and you and her and she, it's a failed cause, right? This is what we didn't do. We were scared. We said, no, don't sit in a room and say their names. Okay, maybe there's a trigger, there's not, right? If you are afraid of something, it will happen whether you address it or not. So what do? There's no easy overnight answer. First, I will say, right, I reject and I have no real meaningful ideological respect for the material support laws and any laws that seek to subjugate and leave no obstacle to the murder of any people, let alone my people. And with that said, I finish the sentence and I say, given that, I am not stupid enough to become a burden on my movement. I am not stupid enough to endanger myself and cause problems for my family or my community. So I will not coordinate. I will not provide direct material support until it's lawful. I'm sorry, respectfully, I don't criticize anybody, but me, I'm not gonna do that. That's not my role, that's not my place. My place is council, organizer. So I'm not gonna do that. We're not gonna coordinate. We're not gonna provide material support to designated organizations. We're gonna find ways to support the Palestinian capacity and right to self-defense. Without question, and we're gonna do it in part in this conference. But I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna violate 18 U.S.C. 2339. Not gonna do it. But I am gonna say, wherever I go, that those laws are racist, anti-Palestinian, murderous, dehumanizing, and I will finish the sentence and I will say, Islamic Jihad and Hamas and Jabha and Qassam and all of them are freedom fighters who are not just fighting for the Palestinian right to survive, but generally the right of Palestinians to live, the right to life, right? The right to food, the right to exist, period, but also fighting for the safety of millions of people around the world whom Israel directly and ideologically and politically and materially threatens. So I will say that, and then I will continue. This is one part of the beginning of the narrative. Now I will say it this way. People will craft it, and we will craft it coming out of this conference in many ways. And then we're gonna finish the sentence, really. And we're gonna finish the sentence and we're gonna say what needs to happen, who must be prosecuted, and we're gonna work on this, is, I'm sorry, I'm losing the names of the organizations, is the JNF, are the Zionist settlers, are the folks in our own communities who are hopping along the war crimes corridor train from the US to Palestine, who are engaging in home invasions and being protected. We force the law and the contradiction to confront itself. And we do that constantly and consistently, right? And then we understand, yes, we don't have the laws and Congress or weapons to enforce all of this, but we do have, number one, justice. We do have morality, and that brings us what? The support and the love of the masses, and these masses exist all over the US, and they exist throughout civil society, and in NGOs, and in institutions, and believe it or not, they also exist sometimes in the halls of various government agencies. And so we engage them and we demand, right, or we say, we're not asking you to violate laws, we're asking you to please make a statement, a clarification that these laws are anti-Palestinian, that they're seeking to facilitate the murder and incremental genocide of Palestinians, and what needs to happen is the prosecution and exposure of the war criminals amongst us. And this perpetuates. I don't want to name a few institutions, but we're already beginning to do that and have these conversations so that they begin to adopt it, right? Policy change, first and last phase, is this. Advocate before it's too late. Access, go to. We have many friends at the UN, small states, big states. I don't want to name countries. A friend of mine, he's an attorney who represents a few governments. And sometimes I'll just, pick up a phone and I'll say, look, I need somebody to say a line today at the UN, just a sentence about refugees, right? Or we had in 2018, Salman Abu Sitta said, hey, Togo is hosting the Israel-Africa Summit. We need you to engage various governments and tell them no. And I think, Saya, you were in the room with us. And so what did we do? We cold called various missions and we said, hey, we'd like a meeting with you. And we met with a few. Right? And we had conversations, and we had some successful conversations, in fact, with governments. Nothing is inaccessible, right? Contacting UN agencies, UN representatives, sympathetic governments, to wage, right? To normalize this narrative. This is the equivalent of what it's illegal for us to do, and we're not doing it. It's called jury nullification, right? Where you say, I understand the laws, they're invalid, they're illegitimate, they should not be enforced. In fact, they should be revoked, right? And that's part of the process. Never, ever, 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 ever distance yourself from any individual or organization that is accused of material support to Palestinians. Ever. The minute that happens, you have endangered all of us. people who are being investigated and want to say, no, I never provided a penny, you better say that, right? Actually, your lawyer better say that for you, you better not say a word, right? But you can, but never ever make that distinction, because that only endangers you. That only endangers those around you. That sets us back, right? Allies, same and more important that you do this and that you do this constantly. And be confident, right? The most important aspect of our struggle, one of the most important aspects of our struggle, is the internal decolonization. These material support laws are a big vehicle of that internal colonization. Be confident in our rights to live and in our right to support our people and our children and our parents in Palestine, Gaza and the refugee camps, wherever they are, right? Be confident that the Palestinian right to return and Palestinian liberation is not just for the benefit of Palestinians, but is really materially, traceably a key to regional and therefore global peace. That we are on the side of morality. Be confident, own it. You need help navigating these narratives. We're here for you. As Al-Awda, we're here for you. I don't want to own up anybody else or point in any direction. Other people are here for you. Be confident, be thoughtful, be smart, and know, right? No cause, this is my line all the time on this, right? There's no rights if you're afraid to enforce them. That no cause and no case is ever won by the timid. And even when we're scared, you know what we do? We fake it, right? We fake it. Power only concedes to power. And everybody here, collectively and individually, is far more powerful than you can imagine. And your power is needed now more than ever. Yeah.